Hello sculptors, boat enthusiasts, and everyone in between. Today, I decided to make a Kraken attacking a little ship on open water. I hope you enjoy the video, and let's start sculpting. I needed to start making a base, so I folded over some foil into this square shape, and then folded in the edges to make it a bit more oval, as that's the shape that I wanted for the ocean. To start on the boat, I made 3 of these C-shaped metal wires, and wrapped masking tape around them to hold their shape. Usually I just go straight into the foil, but because the shape here is a little bit difficult to get without holding the metal wires in place, I did just use some masking tape. I then just wrapped it in some foil and also added some foil on the inside as I wasn't going to be hollowing out the ship. Then I whacked this clay to make it softer so that it's more malleable and I can roll it out without hurting my hands too much. Then, using the oven bake clay adhesive, I painted it all over the boat so that the clay would stick a bit easier. Usually I wouldn't do this on foil that's too rough, but I guess I decided to change my mind today. I cut off all the excess clay and made sure that all of it was attached nicely to the foil and also quite smooth. Now I did attach a lot of clay to the base, but I'm going to completely gloss over it as I tear up most of it later to create the waves. I also don't add any clay on the bottom of the foil as I didn't want to waste too much clay, so I did actually go in after it was baked and used foam clay, which I don't actually show. Then, just using a bit of clay, I attached the boat to the base. As the foil is a bit rough and spiky, I decided to use a bit of extra clay on the top and sides of the boat just to make it a bit smoother so that later when I go into texture it doesn't look too rough. I then decided to add these sort of railings on the front and back of the boat, and then also cut up a bunch of wire, and then as I went along coated them in liquid polymer clay, then attached them as another set of railings. Now, this was very early on to do this. I thought that I was being smart by doing this before any of the texturing, but I still had a lot more form to go with, you know, the beams, and it was really silly of me to do this so soon, but luckily I didn't smush it. I then add kind of the top to the railing after they're all in. I do texture it beforehand because if I was to texture it afterwards, I'd probably end up smushing in all of those little railings. I then made the wheel as well. I then chopped up some wooden skewers, rolled out some clay in this sort of thinning line so that I could start making the masts. I filled some clay glue in between them so that I could slip the skewers in so that they would hold and not disattach from the clay later on, as the wooden skewers don't have a lot of texture on them. I also really did not like how flat the boat was. It's supposed to be in the middle of the ocean, so I added a bit more foil underneath it to kind of hoist it up so that when I add the waves later on, it wouldn't look so flat. You see, I add the bowsprit at a bit of an angle. This is for later on when I add the tentacles of the Kraken. It's going to be actually pulling that one to the side, breaking it off. I then grab my Cosclay to start making the sails. As Cosclay is a bit malleable after it's been baked, it works quite well as it'll be able to bend without snapping. I cut out 3 different sizes, one big, one small, and another one a little bit smaller, kind of in between, as on one of the masts I'm going to have 2, and then on the other one I'm going to have 1, as the crow's nest will be there, and that's later on. I damage them all up, make them look quite tattered, and I use the stickiness of it to my advantage to kind of make it look a bit frayed in the edges. I also bake it, kind of bent over some foil to keep its shape. And then I go on to make the other 2. I also add some extra little shapes down here to make it look a little bit snazzy, you know, as I do. And then using my knife, I kind of chop up this area, make it look quite damaged. I add some extra bits later on to make it look even more like cracked wood. I then mark out this area so that I can add the grate, which I'm gonna put the wires in later on for. I make it as deep as I can without running into the foil either. Then, using this pointy tool I have, I start marking out the areas of where the wooden planks are going to be. I make kind of horizontal lines and then vertical lines, and I don't usually do any sort of pattern. It's all just kind of a bit random, as it would be, probably, I don't know, haven't been on a pirate ship myself. Then I use this kind of pointy silicone tool to clean up the lines so that they're a bit more defined and don't look so messy. It's a little bit difficult to add the sails to the mast. Yeah, that one's called the mast. Oh, got to catch up on my boat terminology. But I just attach it using the clay glue, kind of pressing it into there, and then using some extra clay to secure it, both back and front, top and bottom of the sail. Clay glue does tend to get in the way quite a bit. It's quite sticky if you've never touched it. It's imagine glue that just doesn't dry, so it's even more horrible to get off than normal glue. Not fun. But anyways, I define it, make sure that the sails actually look a bit disattached to the masts themselves. I then use the bottom of my knife as a guide, so that it's a nice circle, and that I don't screw it up. And it's a good size as well, it's surprising. I then attach it to the mast, add the little rods as I did earlier to make it as the railing, add the top to the railing. I cut out a bunch of these little bits for later on, after I do the texturing in the mast, where I kind of scratch it in, make it look like wood, and then I do what I did with the railings earlier, with kind of coating a piece of metal wire in the liquid clay, and then I press it in, and yes, I did a ladder. It actually holds pretty well and looks quite cool in the end. I like it. And then I make another little flag for the top. Using my clay glue, I fill the holes and then shove the masts in them. I attach them, kind of using this circle, so that it looks like it's been attached properly. I don't really mind about it kind of messing up the wood texture that I did on the base earlier, as I can just remake it. I then add some side panels to the ship to add a bit more design to it, make it look a bit more interesting. It looks quite nice with them. I add some going horizontal, and then a couple going, what's the other one? Vertical. Upwards. Yes. And then I texture it. I texture the sides the same as I kind of texture the, what did I just call the panels. And I don't know what that little cube I just did there is. I don't know. I'm just adding little texture and decorations for the sake of it because it looks cool and fun and yay! Then, using my tweezers, I add this kind of grating, layering it up so that it's kind of in this checkered pattern. And then I begin texturing the wood. I didn't really explain how I did this on the side earlier, so I will now. Using this kind of spiky tool, I kind of scratch it in to each of the planks. Mostly going in one direction. Sometimes I do little swirls, sometimes I dig in a bit deeper, sometimes a bit shallower. And really, if you kind of just look at how a wooden plank looks, you can just kind of follow the pattern. And then I make cannons. I make 4 of them at the side. I kind of just make random shapes until it looks right. And I mean, it does kind of look right. It does look like cannons, so I guess I did that right. I do attach them with clay glue, and I do kind of accidentally smush them a little bit, but I do regain the texture a bit later on. Then, using my tweezers and a bit more metal wire, I kind of shove it in to make it look like cracked wood. Looks pretty cool in my opinion. I then go in and make sure to use my scratchy tool to make all the texture as I did on the top of the boat. Remember earlier when I said I was going to tear up the base? Well, this is how I do it. I use my knife and kind of cut around the areas that I don't want the clay to be in right now, and I sort of tear it up. Then, using balls of foil, I kind of layer it down into sort of wavy shapes up against the side of the boat, around it, just so that it kind of looks like waves. I also reuse the foil that I used earlier when I was shaping the sails while baking them, just so that I don't waste any foil. Then I layer up clay on top, making sure to fill in all of the cracks and crevices using extra clay as well, and I also eventually go on top of the waves using more clay so that it gets a bit smoother and I can move them so that they kind of look like they're swashing over. Also remembering the fact that the boat probably is moving forward at some sort of momentum, I put some clay at the front of the boat, making it look like the waves are kind of splashing up outwards as if the water's getting pushed out of the way. Then I start bending some wire to start on the tentacles. I roll out some clay from kind of thick to thin gradient. I do use a bit of foil at the bottom of it to save some clay, but that's only because I was running out on this day and I didn't want to, stop sculpting. I did have to stop sculpting in the end. Then I just kind of wrap the clay around, smooth out all of the seams, and then shape it. Now, you'll see me attaching it to the base here, but I do tear it up later because I have to add the suckers on the tentacles and I can't really reach underneath it. I do 6 tentacles in total, just kind of imagine that the other 2 are somewhere underwater underneath the boat. And I do ruin the whole of the bowsprit by doing that, but it's not the end of the world, just go back in, texture it later. One of the tentacles does also go through the sails, that's why I made that big hole. I always plan ahead, sometimes, not always, sometimes. And then one of the tentacles actually goes diving into the deck. Is it the deck? By the front. No, not the front. The back. By the wheel of the boat. And then I start making the tentacles by pressing in little balls of clay. And I really love doing this. It's quite fun. Quite calming. It actually looks really nice in the end. If I were to ever recommend one thing to sculpt, do tentacles. They look awesome and they're really fun to make. I love doing the little suckers on top. It just, I don't know, it just looks really nice in the end. And now, also, I do blend them into the waves. What I was supposed to do was texture the tentacles. Give them little bumps and kind of a rough surface. I didn't realise that I didn't do this until after it was done baking. However, in the end, I think it actually worked. I'm someone who usually very rarely doesn't texture something, and when I didn't, it actually turned out good. Anyways, ignore that. I start texturing the waves by kind of spamming my little silicone tool into the waves. The last time I did waves like this, I didn't texture them. Again, that was my own fault. But it gives them movement, gives them little ripples in the waves, and makes it look quite alive in the end. Oh, and then I start doing plaster. You can just use clay to do this part, it's not that difficult, but because I want to be different, I decide to use plaster on top of the waves. Now when it kind of clumps up, I can make it look quite frothy, like the foam. You can just do this with clay. Now, when using plaster, you almost have to come to terms with the fact that there's a very high likelihood that after it dries, there's gonna be sections or even huge chunks that kind of just flake off, and you kind of have to just deal with it. But I will say, doing this does look really good in the end. And then after it's baked, I start painting. Obviously I bake it before adding the plaster, don't add it after. But I use this very dark brown texture all over the main body of the boat, so that later on I can come in and dry brush a lighter colour on top to make all of the little crevices stand out. I also paint the inside of this grey black so that it kind of looks like it's going into the ship. Then I start to dry brush. Using the dry brushing technique, which is adding a little bit of paint on your brush and then gently gliding it over the textures, I can make it look proper like proper wood, I mean. And then I go on with a darker brown, even darker than the one I first used, to make all the panels on the side stand out again. Of course, I dry brush another lighter colour on top of this too. I paint the sails by starting off with this kind of dusty brown colour, so that later on I can dry brush on top a whiter colour, so that the edges look quite dirty, especially where it's been torn. It just kind of brings a bit of life into the sails. And then I just paint the great silver. It looks grey, doesn't really matter. And also the little flag up top, also black. I do dry brush on top later with a bit of a grey. I don't show this because I always forget to record stuff. Then I start painting the tentacles. I do a couple coats to make sure that the colour sits nicely and thick. At first I was going to go with a purple, but then I thought that would blend in with the waves a bit too much. I didn't want to do orange as I feel like that's been done quite a lot. So I went for this kind of nice maroonish red. It looks really nice in the end, I really love this colour. Then to paint the little suckers, that sounds mean, I do this kind of light yellow kind of colour. It looks white, but it's a little bit yellow. And kind of paint over the top. I do then go in with the red colour later on and then clean up all of those messy lines that I did. On the inside of the suckers, I paint them pink, kind of a mix between that white, yellow, white-ish colour and the red. And again, it just looks really good. I love how they look. They look really stylized as well. It's good to have style. And then to account for the fact that I had no texture whatsoever on the tentacles, I paint on these kind of pink lines. I just lightened up that base colour a bit. Now, because I add them in kind of different thicknesses of paint and also thicknesses of the lines, they dry sort of different colours, some quite vibrant, some a bit more blended in to the base colour. And in the end, I think it really looks nice. I love how these look. I also paint the cannons. And then to paint the sea, I don't ever wash my brush during this whole process, maybe once or twice when my brush gets a bit clunky from all the dried up paint, but I use it to my advantage so that I can blend the really deep dark colours and the lighter colours as nice as I can. The kind of pattern that I follow with this is on all the raised up areas I go a bit lighter, and then all of the deep down sunken in areas, that's where I put the darkest of the blues. And then of course on top of the waves where the froth is, I mix in a bit of white. Some of the white comes out quite vibrant so that it looks like white, and then sometimes it blends in with a bit of the blue and then turns out into a really light blue. Either way, it looks like froth, and compared to the boat and the tentacles, this is a very vibrant colour. Also, that's what I meant by the plaster's going to come off. You just have to kind of deal with it. Then, after that, ignore the fact that it's on a folder so that I can move it around easily. I use gloss all over the tentacles to make them look really wet. And then I go in with resin on the waves. They look quite matte, so putting this resin on the top gives it a really thick layer of gloss and does make it look really wet. I think it looks great in the end. I have done this, I think, once before, and that alone came out to be probably one of my favourite sculptures just because of the water, and I've been dying to do it again. And after a day of letting that dry, the Kraken attack is complete. I absolutely love how this one came out. It might actually be one of my new favourites. This is slightly inspired by Sea of Thieves if you haven't already noticed. You know, there is a Kraken in that game. It is green and it has weird things at the end of the tentacles, but either way, the whole thing is slightly inspired by that game. Thank you for sticking around so long. I am so grateful that you have, and if you really did enjoy the video, then maybe consider leaving a like. It'll help me. And if you want to see more things like this in the future or some other random stuff, then feel free to subscribe. I'll be super grateful. Have an amazing day. Thank you so much for sticking around. See you next time. Goodbye.